For today's episode, we are going to be going to the distant, far-flung reaches of the Isles. We're going out to Einteil and Scythianach. And so, in honor of it, I decided to wear a wee touch of tartan. So then, chapter... What chapter are we on right now? 33. Chapter 33. Winter of 1046. The fleet anchored their long ships outside the bay, protected well enough from the storms. For now, but the sailors aboard would need to bring their ships into dock if they were to stay here. From the prow of the ship, Hvitbjorn looked over the small bay and the houses there. Snow blanketed the lands before him, and the houses happily exhaled plumes of white smoke. There was a small wooden dock for them to tie to, so he ordered they approach. Might nae be wise, Ragnar said. The folk here are well knowing what a raiding ship looks like. I'm sure they do, but they will see our 20 ships, and only this one coming forth. They won't assume it's an attack. Ragnar nodded. Sound logic there, laddie. But these are Scots you're dealing with here. Just let's go slow and I'll do the talking at first. The rowers pushed them closer and closer to the dock, and some few people did emerge from the houses to go down and meet them. That's Andy, Ragnar said. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Andy! Oi, lad! Look at you! You've grown! Who's that? Some Norse? Asked the young man, who had walked through the snow that piled on the dock. Ragnar had called to him in Norse, and that's how the boy responded. He speaks my tongue, Ragnar noted. Aye, this whole place is still ruled to the Hebrides by you lot, Ragnar shrugged. Many of us learned both. He waved again. He wore a fur and woolen cap, but his red hair still tumbled down over his shoulders. Aye, Uncle Ragnar, is that you? Aye, it's me, he turned to Hvitbjorn. You can call forth the rest of the ships if you like. This'll nae be a bothered landing. As sure as his word, they glid the ship to the dock, and the man Ragnar had called Andy caught the ropes flung at him and tied them down. Ragnar leapt from the side railing with the enthusiasm of a puppy and wrapped his arms around the young man in a death grip. Hi, uncle! What are you doing here? Andy then tied his own arms around Ragnar's midsection and lifted him from the wooden decking. Also, and I'm gay sorry to tell you, but your mother's asked for this. Without another word, he spun like a wrestler, his grip still firm and around him, and tossed Ragnar over the side of the dock deftly. Ragnar screamed as he fell beyond the dock's edge and plunged into the icy water. He disappeared below the black surface of the water, and only his cap stayed floating there. His arms coiled out in the water while, like grasping tentacles, just a second before he emerged, sputtering and starting to swim towards the shore, not wasting a moment complaining or demanding answers. Andy turned to Hvitbjorn, who put up a hand for him to take, and nodded. I am Hvitbjorn. I don't want a hug. The boy laughed and took the hand, gripping it hard. Well met, funny man. Why dinna ye come on in out of the cold to me black house, and we'll have ourselves a chatty. Hvitbjorn shook his head and then nodded. What the hell are you people ever saying? He asked himself. The boy heard him and laughed delightedly at him. I can see why my uncle sails with you. You're a funny one. I think I will call you funny man. Do you drink, funny man? Hvitbjorn turned to the rest of the crew on board his lead ship. The Bodil is feasting, and beckoned they hail the rest of the fleet to come closer. Aye, I drink. Right to the ale. They began walking down the length of the dock. Nothing like that. This far into winter. We've only the barley malt. Ragnar mentioned this drink. Like fire and smoke captured in strong liquor drink. I do want to try some. Ha! He's undertold you about the qualities. Nay, it's fair mair than that. Oh, uncle, fancy a swim? Ye bachelor child! The boy put up his hands in defense. It were only doing what your ma asked of me. Ragnar, full soaked and shivering, stomped along the dock until he reached the two men. Then he grabbed Andy's thick spun tunic, placed his footing, and flipped the boy over into the water. He looked then at Hvitbjorn, still shivering. Hvitbjorn's attention was still focused on the side where the boy had disappeared to the depths. Your people have odd customs. That's... He paused to chatter his teeth. That's nae customary! Hvitbjorn shrugged, then jumped in after Andy. An hour later, the ships were all well secured to the trees and anchored to the bottom of the bay. They had found enough space to accommodate all the warriors who'd come to this place for the winter, 180 in total. And with the help of the local fishing boats, they unloaded the cargo and supply they'd brought with them. It was easily decided before they came on this voyage that they would not be a burden to the people here. They would bring food and drink and furs and wool to trade for their stay. Although Ragnar assured all who'd listen that his people would treat them with the hospitality of family. In the largest hall in the village, though this was still not a great hall, Hvitbjorn sat with Ragnar, Andy, Niels, Stefanos, Skadhild, and Harald. Olaf was still out helping to organize the landing of the cargo and loot, but they knew he'd come in soon. It was near dark. With them sat 6 members of Ragnar's family. 2 were his sisters, his nephew, of course, another nephew, and a niece, and a wizened old man that Ragnar had introduced as his own father. In his hand, Hvitbjorn held an earthenware cup with a most bold and volcanic barley malt. It was everything Ragnar and Andy had described. The drink burned like a Muspelheim and left a warmth within that comforted his frozen bones. This was his second cup, and he was slowing his drinking because he really had to. Strange name for a place like this. I can't even say that word, Eric said from his place at the table. All laughed in good humor. Around them, small bits of blackened thatch dangled from the walls, and smoke hung thick in the air around them, making everything a haze, lit by the rich orange firelight. Hvitbjorn sipped again the drink. Despite the choking and coughing of his first sip, he'd grown to love it quickly, and felt the power lay slowly over him like a warm blanket that wanted him to but fall dead or asleep. Aye, it touched strange to your foreign tongue, and it be. Kill Tarchlain, Ragnar repeated. Dinna you worry about it. It's our home and well enough the name be. It had been a happy reunion when the Ragnar had come to his ancestral home to see his family. Despite the gift Andy was to give him being done right away, he learned soon after that his mother had fallen ill some winters back and was dead. They all drank a mournful dram for the woman, and those who knew her recalled her fondly for her harshness, apparently, particularly her husband. Ragnar's father, who was also called Ragnar, said something, and Ragnar replied. What is he asking? Asked Skadhild. He wanted to know why we're spending the winter here. I just told him about the heat and warmth we'd seen down in Miklagarda. He gestured to Stefanos. Wanted to know where this one's from, you see. Ah, well, Hvitbjorn began. I think we were all in need of the rest and time away from the tumult of such constant battle after Inga and Hafod's death. They all nodded solemnly. Though they had fought 3 battles since that fortress fight, and 2 of those had been against Harald's forces. They had warriors to meet some of their former companions in the fight. They had worried to meet, but they'd been fortunate not to have seen anyone they knew. To Inga and Hafod, he said, raising the drink. Hafod and Inga, replied Eric, and others joined. They all raised their cups and drank. Never was a woman like her, Niels said with a sad smile. most beautiful woman I ever saw, and vicious as a storm at sea. Each thought for a brief second of the storm they had endured passing from the Norwegian coast to Scotland. They hadn't lost any ships, but one man was thrown overboard by the force of the wind and lost. That's why the old Brynulf kept on after her. And Haveld, Skadhild said. Now there was a man, solid as stone bridge, and stronger than all of you here together. God, that man made me want to be a woman. You are a woman, Harold pointed out. I am, but he made me want to be one. This whole world's twisted up your man's ways. Only way to get anything done as my kind is to take up a sword and axe and do like you do. No, it isn't, Eric replied fervently. My mother has never fought a day in her life. But her strength is in 100 other things. Whelping pups and laundering clothes, you mean? There's great honor in producing warriors. Friends, Hvitbjorn said loudly, I'm sure you and Eric's mother are both women of good character, worthy of the honor bestowed you. There's no need to argue now. We are warm, away from battle, with family and good drink. This was not the first time Eric and Skadhild had argued, and he began to suspect it was more than simple banter between fellow warriors. Of Haveld, then, Niels said to break the quiet that had fallen. Greater a warrior there has never been, better a fighter I have never seen, strength like a raging horse, and still the speed of one too. Rarely did his axe fall or meet flesh that it didn't rend away the whole limb in life. Haveld, the others responded in praise and respect. And of Inga, Niels continued. A woman? A woman? Perhaps, like Freya is a woman, like the Valkyrie are women. Beauty that shone brighter than a sunrise over the Mediterranean Sea, and whispered more warmly than desert winds full of spice. The others smiled at this description. Inga, they replied, and drank a sip. Only a sip. And her body, Hvitbjorn said, perhaps more comfortable than he should be. Every curve of her perfect. Those hips made me wild with lustful desire. He breathed out and made up his mind to share. I lay with her once. That was a special instance in his life. Where? Asked Niels. In Novgorod, Yaroslavl. When? A night of the feast some night. Not sure which exactly it was. That was a year ago or so. I have thought on it many a night since. Damn! Niels said, taking a drink. No, Hvitbjorn responded, seeing the look on his face. I did too. Another night, I am sure. God damn it, Harold said. They turned to him. What? You too? Asked Ragnar. Now all eyes turned to Ragnar, and he bit his tongue, realizing he'd said too much. No way. You, Ragnar. Weren't you waiting for your marriage? Ragnar sighed. There was literally no saying no to that woman. How many here present lay with Inga? He asked, and raised his own hand. Hvitbjorn, Niels, Eric, Harold all raised their hands, and then slowly and tentatively, Skadhild did too. They looked at her aghast. They all started laughing together at the moment, knowing that Inga smiled on their merriment. Surely Inga stands now with raised and triumphant arms and circles around the fields at Folkvanger, Niels said, reveling in the praise heaped on her from Midgard. I too am sure that she flies with a Valkyrie steed that Valhall many nights to see her beloved Haveld, who could be in no other place. Hail, Skål. Ragnar's father said something in their guttural, unintelligible language, and Ragnar replied quickly. What did he ask? Asked Niels, still laughing. He asked why we were raising our hands. I didn't tell him. They all laughed the harder at this. Who did ever lay with Haveld as well? Eric asked Skadhild. She breathed deeply. Sadly, that's one mountain I was not in time to mount. He did make a comment about me in passing once. That night I should have pressed further. What When was this? Asked Niels. The night before that battle, where they both died. I remember that night, Ragnar said. There was nowhere safe to be free of the sounds of their loving. Many a night were like that. He smiled at the memory. It's best you didn't then, Hvitbjorn said. Letting them that last night together is what fate had written for them. And then, Niels said, realizing, and growing teary-eyed, he looked up with a smile. They died as they lived. Comfort and glory from the battle and in each other's embrace. He laughed as a tear streamed down his face. That was fate indeed for them. Evermore, hereafter in the halls and throughout the 9 realms, may their love be a shining beacon on which we each can see through rains and winds. The greatest lover and the storm hunter, wrapped together in the light and warmth. Their love in Midgard, too short for we mortal men. Their time spent here too long away from the gods. Now they are called home. The fires of that camp, we burned them in, rise higher still throughout the tree. Hail, Niels said with a knowing smile. White Bear, that was a grand poem for them. I'm sure they loved it. They are busy, Hvitbjorn said with a laugh. All raised their cups to this, regardless. The idea of Hafvald and Inga loving each other in the afterlife and delighting in the lives of those still toiling on Midgard gladdened them, thinking of their dead loved ones. In this way, always made people feel better about their departure. None knew for certain, but the story of it was more than enough to embolden them and helped Ever with the grief. Now the question I have, Niels said after a moment. Who here, among you all, lay with Hafvald? He waited expectant, but none raised their hands. That was that supposed to be a jest? Asked Eric. I suppose it would have been better if anyone laughed. No, it's the truth of it that we all lay with Inga, but Hafvald, I fought with Hafvald. That man I had warring by my shoulder and watched a brilliant warrior kill dozens of men, Hvitbjorn said. Aye, that was something he had in surplus. You know he was the one who named me Strong Arm. Praise like that means all the more coming from a brute like him. By God, when he hit, you knew it wasn't something that men were supposed to be able to endure. You all remember when he and Harold had ourselves a fist fight in the waves in Palestine? Themselves, excuse me. Asked Hvitbjorn. It was Cyprus we fought in, Harold corrected. Oh, that's right. He shook his head. With all of you standing around watching me get my face smashed in by the horned beast, Harold laughed, and he named me Strong Arm after that. To Hafvald, then, he sighed. They all raised their cups and drank together. Each punch I make hereafter is a prayer I make for him. Hail, they replied. Each woman I fuck, I'll be thinking of Inga, Niels said, and to this they all laughed. Right, laddie, now it's about a day's walk north, and you can see him now. That's it. That's the store there. They'd been in Kiltarlane for a week now, and already Hvitbjorn had grown restless. It looked like it would be a mild winter on the Isle of Scythianach, which meant some few days of brilliant sun to reflect off the crisp snow, but still, the brutal cold bit. I see it, Hvitbjorn said. There in the distance, peeking over the hills, was a tall, thin stone. Doesn't seem that far. A whole day, you think? Ragnar nodded. The clarity of the sky overhead was a strange contrast against the frigid air, and they were both wrapped in thick cloth, yet shielding their eyes to the light overhead. Aye, well, start your walking there, and we'll see how you feel by the night. He grinned at him, I think you'll be stripping off that coat before you arrive. Though, dinna throw it down and carry on faster. You'll need her tonight if you plan to stay up there. Hvitbjorn looked ahead. The clean blue sky seemed to cast in a stark contrast, as the hills were all white with snow cover, including the high ridge to their left. The ridge, however, showed many places where the dark gray stone, appearing black on the snow, showed through. We'll have a deer hunted for supper by the time you get back, laddie, Ragnar said as Hvitbjorn started to walk. The snow made for a hindrance, but it was nothing he couldn't bear to trudge through. He wondered if he'd be back that very night, in fact, though he was ready for a full night out in the cold. See that you do, he called back, waving. He wore thick sealskin boots around his woolen foot wraps, and still felt the chill through. He had a pack with him containing food and a skin of water he was warned he must make absolutely certain didn't freeze. After an hour of walking, he pulled free the water skin and drank, thankful for the incredible cold of it, though worrying it might actually turn to ice. That would be bad. As he took another drink, he looked back and saw that the village fires were not that far away. This stunned him. He thought he'd gone much further. The uneven terrain and high snow that had made the path difficult. He turned back for the strange standing stone he was told he absolutely must go and see, and saw that it looked not much closer than when he'd started. He breathed in a lung full of cold air and breathed out a cloud, and then continued on his path. When he stopped later for a quick meal of dried oats and water, he looked out over the beautiful strange strait between the isle and the small island off its coast. Everything about this land seemed harsh and strong, and he found himself loving it. From his vantage, he had a perfect view of the dark brown ships in the crisp black water of the bay. The sun reflected off the water, and he was overcome with a moment, looking down on his collected total wealth in the world. It was his, and it didn't belong to him. Hvitbjorn walked all day, feeling the burning of the exertion in his legs and the heat swirling out from his body. He also genuinely wanted at times to cast off his cloak and leave it to be collected later, but he knew that would be a fool's decision. Never daunted, though, growing some weary, he eventually came to the top of a hill that overlooked the hill of the store. The stone was an impressive edifice standing alone atop a small mount surrounded by other rocks that looked each like they were trying to imitate this giant. Up close, he could see why it was touted as something to come see, no matter the struggle in getting here. Its sheer presence filled Hvitbjorn with awe, and then he saw it. He saw what Ragnar had wanted him to see. The stone was him, half white, half black, alone and imposing, standing tall amid stones that would each be worshipped elsewhere, but were here dwarfed. This great towering rock was exactly what Hvitbjorn told people he was, half of both and greater for it. The store stood atop a large hill, one he realized he'd have to climb. He looked west to the great rise of the ridge behind which the sun was already hiding. There wouldn't be much light left in this day, and he had to find somewhere to sleep, but he already knew where he'd lay. There were some few trees scattered around the base of the mount on which the store stood, and Hvitbjorn spent some time searching under the snow beneath these and stripping some of the branches off of them to gather wood. Finally, with a collection of kindling and a bundle of sticks, he made the trek up the steep incline. His pack was no overly heavy burden, but the uphill in all his clothing, even in the cold, made him sweat quickly. He did slip and nearly hit the ground twice. But each time he managed to reassert his footing and stay himself from the tumble that would surely see him at the bottom of the hill. On one such a slip, he had to catch himself by grabbing a stone with his gloved hand, and in a moment of panic, he felt the rock shift in place. Fortunately, he'd retained his balance and so was left standing there a moment with the rock under his hand and looked at it, holding his breath. Well, if you want to go, then go. He twisted to his right and pulled the stone out of place. It then tumbled free. Still breathing heavily, he watched the stone plummet down the slope, crashing along the white snowy surface and carving dark streaks after it. It was getting darker and darker, and now Hvitbjorn started to feel the cold more profoundly. The cold was particularly strong here as wind blew over him from the ridge behind the store. He turned his face away from the cutting gusts and carried on. The last little bit of the climb felt like sheer rock under the snow, and here he had to be very careful, as it was a steep incline. He took out his knife and used it as a pick to pull himself up. The process put more burning into his forearms, but it was effective, and eventually the gradient evened out, and he felt like he could walk normally. There he stood now, the great rock of the store rising up above him. He looked up to the top and saw the stars in the darkening sky beyond its high peak. Behind him, he saw the beautiful vista of the strait and the isle, all made bright by the reflective nature of the snow covering it. Hvitbjorn shivered and stomped around to make for himself a depression in the snow where he could make camp. This place wasn't terribly sheltered overhead, but here, where he stood, was protected from the wind. When that was done, he got to work on the fire. It was a careful process of piling the small and driest sticks together in the shape of a bridge between two larger sticks. He used his knife to shave some bark and branch core into a dried mulch that would put under the bridge. It took him longer than he'd have liked, with the flint and tinder to get its spark to take and start to smolder, but he wasn't surprised at all. He blew on it until on the little smolder, and it started to spew out smoke. He encouraged the glowing ember, then, and a tiny trickle of flame licked up. Eventually, he sat relaxed, his back to the store, his legs folded, and the flame blooming in front of him. He had managed to gather and bring up many sticks, so his fire should last him the night, and his cloak was warm and comforting around him. The drying sweat was chill and annoying, but the sharp warmth of the fire was a deep comfort to him. He sighed contentedly, smelling the smoke of the flame, watching the twinkle of the stars overhead, and feeling the incredible chill on his brow. The air stunk of the crisp cleanliness of cold, mingling sometimes with the savory aroma of the wood smoke. His exhales, as always, came out as a haze and became a cloud as it met the smoke and they combined in the air. He watched the breaths he shared with the fire drift away. A gust of wind that had somehow clung to the store then landed like a falling stone and plunged straight down into the fire as he watched. He knew not the exact process of how wind streams could do that, but regardless, the fire was forced to breathe an enormous dose of life, and the embers roared with brightness. The image that moment burned into his sight was something he knew he'd never forget. The black cracks in the embers showing as dead contrast to the orange seared into his memory forever. The sun had gone completely now, but the stars and the snow made the whole night shine, and it did so for him alone. He was there, against the stone, that he felt so closely resembled what he wanted to show to the world. A man of duality, the wolf and the bear, black and white, the nameless raider, the Viking, the Varangian. Took out another skin from the pack he'd brought with him. This contained much of the strong drink that Ragnar loved so much. There was also honeymead in it, and more bits of the vision mushroom. He looked at the glorious night, This was the best place and the best time to journey inwards and seek answers or clarity within, so he drank. It didn't taste as bad as he thought it would. The last time he'd drunk anything resembling medicine was the Berserker and Ulfhedder mead, and nothing would have tasted as bad as those. Kvasir's blood itself, without honey, must have tasted better than those. He looked down at the skin. Was there still any of Kvasir's wisdom to be shared in mead? There were so many questions he had about everything. Most of them, all the greatest, was what was he? The chieftain with no name? He'd been told that the survivor they had left from their first assault on Magnus's stronghold had overheard the men calling him something. Thus, there had grown a name with his reputation, the Varangian. He liked that. But was he still? Was he a leader of men? A champion? A warrior? A skald? He drank from the skin, then shook his head. There was another skin in the pack he brought out now and drank from it. This contained only the pure and golden mead. Delicious. The gray purple of the night shrouded everything. He looked into the cold darkness of it now and saw death. The death of each day, written in darkness. Like the end of the year. I have been so long without this rest. I haven't let myself sleep in this winter. I have always been pushing on for the next thing. At the end of each day, you must sleep. It's the same for the year. Summer is for life and making. Winter is for the sleep of death. I have been in the working world too long, waking world too long, these last few years, and I haven't let myself sleep. The end of the year is for that sleep. That I will allow my men, myself. The effect of the mushrooms were starting to take within his other, his hugr and munr swirling with the thoughts and color. He breathed hard against the feeling and felt like he took in the heat of the flame as he did. As he sat there, he expected visions, transportation to some representation of an afterlife, or glory field somewhere. Would he see his father again? Had he before? Would he see Valhall? That hadn't happened yet, though by his counting, he'd seen hell twice. Was he cursed? No, he whispered, as a bead of sweat dripped from his nose. I experienced all these things, all this life, all this death, and the gods live a life of a mortal through me. My celebration, my conquests, my failures, that... He looked up. It is all life. All things are a part of life. I am not but waiting for the moment of decision when I am deemed for Valhall, or Folkvanger, or Helheim, or another realm. I live the 9 fates of this life. My life. Fate is... He remembered the image of standing at the base of the tree near the Urd, that well of lights. Fate is not but where and how I die. It is where and how I live. All is within fate. My life is a blazing beacon fire for my father to warm himself, and the gods are warmed so the same. Make my life a light, the lightness of Hugr. The presence of overwhelming and beautiful realization washed over him. He saw things so clearly. So much was there within him, a sense of glory for the very fact of his being here now, within these thoughts. This was the only moment. He sat all that night, alone with his thoughts and surrounded by memories of a life lived to fullest extent. It was his, and he was greedy with it here upon Midgard. All those who loved him, though, now shared in it, delighted in it. His life burned brightly across the 9 realms. He could feel it. That kind of happened to me, a bit of it. I'm a big fan of the Isle of Skye, obviously. It was no small thing to make Ragnar from the Isle of Skye, and so I decided, perfect. And when I was camping underneath the Old Manor store, something that I have actually had the great privilege of doing twice now. Hmm. It might be more than that. I remember one night the first night I ever did so, a stream, just a column of wind clung to the stone somehow and landed straight in my fire, just made it burst with life. And I will never forget the image of that brightness burned into my memory. It was amazing. It was amazing. And of course, the barley malt that they're drinking is Scotch, or at least what would eventually evolve into Scotch. Yeah. So that's chapter, gods, where are we? Chapter 30 something. Yeah, that's the chapter. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Skål.